Hello, my name is Ivy Potter, and the author that I decided to do my presentation over is Melissa Sweet. And she is unique because she is not only an author, but she is also an illustrator. Melissa Sweet was born in Wyckoff, New Jersey. She studied at the Kansas City Art Institute, and she worked and had all sorts of different types of jobs. She did commercial art, posters, greeting cards. She even made handmade books. But through her career, she has published over 60 children's books and illustrated more than 80. 4 books, she has both been the author and the illustrator of those books, and those are the ones that we're going to talk about today. Now she lives in Rockport, Maine, with her dog, Ruby, and her husband. So the first book that we're going to talk about is Some Writer, the story of E.B. White. This is an amazing book, and it was a New York Times bestseller and Orbis Pictus Award winner. Also, Carmen, A Little More Red. This book was a New York Times Best Illustrated book. And then the book that I'm going to do my read aloud today is Balloons Over Broadway, The True Story of the Puppeteer of Macy's Parade. This was a Siebert Medal winner, as well as an Orbis Pictus Award winner. Balloons Over Broadway. What I'd like you to do and pay attention to in this book is her illustration. She really likes to use watercolors, and she does kind of a collage format, so it's really interesting. It starts out here with a picture of Tony Sarg, who she's writing about, biography. And a little quote from him, it says, "Every little movement has a meaning of its own." From the time he was a little boy, Tony Sarg loved to figure out how to make things move. He once said he became a marionette man when he was only 6 years old. His father had asked him to feed their chickens at 6:30 in the morning every day. Tony had an idea. What if he could feed the chickens without leaving his bed? He rigged up some pulleys and ran ropes from the chicken coop door to his bedroom window. That night he spread chicken feed outside the chicken coop door. The next morning, Tony pulled on the rope and the door to the chicken coop opened. The chickens ate their breakfast, Tony stayed snug in his bed, and his dad, so impressed, never made Tony do another chore. When Tony grew up, he moved to London, where he discovered that no one was making marionettes for kids anymore. So out of wood, cloth, and string, Tony began to make puppets. He figured out ways to make his marionettes move so lifelike that they performed as they were real actors. Word soon spread about Tony's amazing marionettes. When Tony moved to New York City, the Tony Sarg Marionettes began performing on Broadway. In the heart of New York City, in Herald Square, was the biggest store on earth, R.H. Macy's department store. Macy's had heard about Tony Sarg's puppets and asked him to design a puppet parade for the store's holiday windows. So Tony made new puppets based on storybook characters, then attached them to gears and pulleys to make them move. Here's a great example of her collage and wonderful color that she uses. In Macy's Wondertown windows, Tony's mechanical marionettes danced across the stage as if by magic. All day long they performed to shoppers jostling for a better look. But Macy's had an even bigger job in store for Tony. Many of the people working at Macy's were immigrants. As the holidays approached, they missed their own holiday traditions of music and dancing in the streets. Macy's agreed to put on a parade for the employees, and they hired Tony to help. Tony, too, was an immigrant, so he loved the idea of creating a parade based on street carnivals from all over the world. He made costumes and built horse-drawn floats, and Macy's even arranged to bring in bears, elephants, and camels from the Central Park Zoo. The animals joined hundreds of Macy's employees on Thanksgiving Day, 1924, winding their way from Harlem to Herald Square. It was a dazzling parade. In fact, Macy's first parade was such a success that they decided to have one every year on Thanksgiving Day to celebrate America's own holiday. All the people. Each year the parade grew, but when Macy brought in lions, tigers, in addition to the bears, elephants, and camels, the animals roared and growled and frightened the children. Here they asked, "Tony, can you think of something spectacular?" Here he says, "Okay." Macy's asked Tony to replace the animals. Tony hoped to replace the animals with some kind of puppet. His marionettes were less than 3 feet tall. He would have to make much larger puppets in order for them to be seen in the parade. And how could he make them strong enough to hold up in bad weather, yet light enough to move up and down in the streets? Tony knew of a company in Ohio that made blimps out of rubber, the perfect material for any weather. When he called the company and showed them his sketches, they agreed to make Tony what he wanted. Still, how could Tony make his big puppets move? Then Tony had an idea from an Indonesian rod puppet in his toy collection. On Thanksgiving Day, Tony's creatures, some as high as 16 feet, spilled into the streets, and the crowds cheered wildly. Part puppet, part balloon, the air-filled rubber bags wobbled down the avenues, propped up by wooden sticks. See the little guys? By now the sidewalks were so packed with people that only those in the first few rows could really see the parade. Tony realized his puppets would have to be even bigger and higher off the ground. And though the sticks helped to steer the puppets, they were stiff and heavy. Tony wanted his balloons to articulate, to move and gesture, more like puppets. But how? With a marionette, the controls were above the puppet, hangs down. But what if the controls were below the puppet and it could rise up? During the next year, Tony set his new idea into motion. This time, he asked the company in Ohio to make balloons out of rubberized silk, as strong as rubber, but lighter than rubber alone. Most important, Tony ordered the balloons to be filled not with just air, but with helium too. Since helium is lighter than air, it would make the balloons rise. Once the puppets were completed, they were deflated and shipped back to Tony in New York. Tony did not know he didn't know everything would go as planned. What if the balloons were filled with too much helium, he says? Or what if one of them hits a sharp object? It was still dark on Thanksgiving morning when Tony filled the balloons with helium, tethered them down with sandbags. But by 1 p.m., the sidewalks were packed with people ready for the parade. Then one by one, Tony cut the lines to the sandbags. He says, "Let's have a parade!" Oh, this is my favorite picture. Oh. Shows it up here. And the magnificent upside-down marionettes rose up to the skies. Nodding and waving to the crowds below, they sailed past Central Park, they sailed down Broadway. They shimmied and swayed through the canyons of New York City. High above the crowds, they flounced in the afternoon wind, pulling the rope handlers this way and that, yet with every heave-ho the balloons gestured and articulated like wild puppets, and the crowd screamed for more. After the balloons were eased under the L, they entered in front of Macy's at Tony's Wondertown windows. It was a parade New Yorkers would never forget. And from that day on, every Thanksgiving morning, crowds had lined the sidewalks of New York City to see what new balloons would rise to the skies for Macy's famous parade. Tony Sarg, the puppeteer who loved to figure out how to make things move, had set the stage with a little rigging for a puppet to be anything more than anyone could imagine it could be. So the activity that I decided to do with this book was to make parade headbands. So the children could decorate the headbands however they'd like. They could pick either the elephant or the tiger to color and decorate, and then we would staple those on top of their headbands, and they could wear those. And then we could see if they could move like the Macy's Thanksgiving Day parade balloons. So thank you for your time, and I hope you enjoyed the presentation and learning more about Melissa Sweet.